Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Dan and today we are kicking off our new deep dive series where we go into the technical details of Tako AI. We are starting with the setup process since a couple of you requested more details on the installation procedures, so we thought this was the best place to begin. We will be covering three key chapters in this video. The first is configuration, setting up the .env file and understanding the variables Tako needs to function. The second chapter is the Docker method install, which is the quickest way for you to get it up and running. The third is the git clone method, which is a manual walkthrough if you prefer to build from source or want to go the developer route. Let's jump right in with the environment file configuration. The first thing you do is navigate to the Okta AI agent's GitHub repository page. We will provide a link in the description below so you can click on it and land on this page. Once you land on the page, you scroll down until you find a section named Quick Start. And if you scroll down a little bit further below, you will see two sections for instructions. One of them are Linux or Mac OS, or if you're on a Windows machine like I am, we have Windows instructions here too. Since this chapter is about .env setup, I'm just going to pull down the environment sample file and then let's look into configuring that file. We'll open it up in your favorite IDE. In this case, I'm using VS Code. Okay, we have very recently reorganized the environment file, so it's easier for you to know what's required and what's optional. The very first thing you need to configure is your Okta URL. So it can be your dev tenant, test tenant, integrator tenant, doesn't matter. This is the tenant for the URL for the tenant that you're going to use with Tako AI. We are defaulting to API token here because that's the quickest way to do this. If you want OAuth 2, we'll scroll down and look at the advanced section later on. So here we are going to use API token, and then you can generate an API token with read-only permissions, and you can paste it here. We will get into what concurrent limit is, but you can leave it at 18 for now and then proceed. So you're done with part 1, which is the Okta configuration. The second required configuration is going to be the AI provider configuration. Tako supports all these LLM providers. In this case, I'm going with OpenAI. So I type OpenAI here, I paste my OpenAI API key, and then pick my models. And that's it. Once you're done, this is all the .env basic configuration is. Your Tako will be up and working. So let's move on and look through a little bit more complex options here. If you're not going with OpenAI, you are free to choose any of the other providers and those respective settings here. If you need further help, please open a GitHub issue or send us an email and we will be happy to support it. If you use Ollama or any of the local VMs, you can use this section to configure those as well. Let's move on to the optional and advanced settings. If you're going to sync your users to the optional SQLite database, you can provide custom attributes for the users too. So if you have custom attributes on the Okta user profile and you want to sync them so that it's easier for you to query, then you can provide a comma separated value here. If you are syncing users and you also want to sync deprovisioned users, which is not done by default, you can set this flag to true, and you can also set these flags in case you do not want all deprovisioned users, but there's a cutoff date, like there's a cutoff date for the creation timestamp or the updated timestamp. If you want to sync Okta devices which are in Okta into your optional SQLite database, you can set this flag to true. It's just going to take a little bit more because I do know that devices stay there almost forever unless you clean up, and they can grow quite a bit. The next section is where I mentioned where you can set up OAuth 2 if you don't want to set up the API token route. So understand that this type of integration will not work with a client ID and secret. Okta enforces a JWKS key. So create the client ID and provide the client ID here. The scopes are already predefined here. I mean, if you want to remove them, add them, you can happily do them here, but these are the default ones. Then once you generate a private key in the Okta admin console, copy paste it here. These are the cookie settings. So unless you want to change any of these to a more timeout period, right now it's set to 30 minutes. So if you wanted to make it 60, you can change these variables. The next thing is log level. You can change it to either info or debug. So debug is just if you want to see more information or something is failing and use to troubleshoot. The max tool calls is the limit. So if in case your LLM went into a loop, this is a final protection which stops from having infinite calls, and you have a circuit breaker here in case that happens. So let's talk about this concurrent limit. This is the easiest way I could do this. If somebody has a better way to do this, I'm happy to hear and we can make changes. So if you navigate back to the README section and scroll down, when you create an API token, you can set the percentage of how much API rate limits are provided to this token. So depending on the type of the tenant you have and depending on the percentage you set, here are the recommended setting values that you can set on the concurrent limit. All this is doing is trying to maximize the speed if you're using Okta API calls to sync to the database, or if you're using API calls for running your queries. This setting is used to decide how many parallel threads can be used, so to make your queries faster. Again, this is what we came up with. This was the easiest way we could define it, but if we are wrong or if there are better methods, we would be happy to hear from you. Please comment below. That's pretty much it from a .env setup perspective. Let's close this section and move on to the next chapter, which is the Docker setup. Let's start with the second section on how to get Tako up and running with Docker. In the README, if you scroll down, you will see the section for Docker Quick Start. You have a few prerequisites to be met. You will need Docker installed on your machine. You will need an Okta tenant with super admin access, so you can either generate the API token or the OAuth 2 token. The tokens themselves are read-only, but you will need super admin access to generate or create those tokens. And then you will need to have access to one of the supported AI providers. So it can be any of those which are mentioned in the .env file before, but you will need to have access to any of those providers. Once you have them, if you scroll down a little bit more, we have two sets of instructions. One is if you're a Linux or Mac OS user, follow these commands, or I'm on Windows and I'm going to use these Windows instructions provided here. Let's start with the first two instructions, which is just creating a folder, and then we navigate to that folder. The next thing we do is we are creating 3 folders. So we have a folder named SQLite DB, we have logs, and we have certificates for self-signed SSL certs. Irrespective of if you're syncing your user data to a SQLite or not, you still need the SQLite DB folder because that's where we keep the basic information, the basic users, and there's some information for Tako to run. So you will need to have this folder created. Then let's pull down the Docker Compose file and let's view it in our IDE of choice. This is a very basic Docker Compose. So the first thing is the image. We are tagging it with the latest image tag, but if you want to use a previous version or if you want a specific version, you can just change the tag here and that will work. We set the pull policy to always because we saw that sometimes the cache versions were being pulled and we had users reporting issues. So the pull policy is set to always. We set the volume mounts for SQLite, the certs and log files, and we pass the location to our environment file. And that's pretty much here. So these settings from our testing perspective are good enough, but if you want to increase them, decrease them, go ahead and make those changes. But that's all we have in this Docker Compose file. The next thing is pulling down our environment variables, which we already did in the first section, so I'm not going to go over those, but those are the next steps to pull down the env file and set up your env file. I have my environment file configured, and I have also created an API token, set that to 100%. I'm also on an integrator plan, and since I set my rate limit to 100%, I have configured my Okta concurrent limit environment variable to 35. Once your environment file is configured, you keep scrolling down until you find the launch application section. Let's start the first command to start the Docker container. Okay, that looks good. Let's check the logs to make sure we didn't run into errors. Okay, so if you see this, you can ignore these because we are generating private keys, SSL certs. So this is good, and as long as you see the application startup is complete and you see it running on this, you're good to go. Use the URL provided here and let's launch the browser. You can ignore this and say continue to localhost. Again, like I said, the SSL certificates generated are local signed ones, so you will see this warning. The very first screen you see is the initial setup. This is where you create the initial user, which will be saved in the SQL database, and this will be your user the next time you log into this application. And click on complete setup. And that's it. You have set up Tako AI up and running with Docker. So once you're in here, you can sync your users, or you can just start firing off your queries and you're good to go. We'll close this section and move on to the final section, which shows you how you can clone the repository and start from scratch there. Now let's move on to the final section, which is installing Tako AI by cloning the Git repository. We navigate to the same URL as previously for the Okta AI agent GitHub page, and you scroll down to the section which is Quick Start Docker. Right below that, you will have alternative install options, and you have a link to our wiki page. Click on that link. Once you are here, scroll down until you see the installation section, and you need certain prerequisites to be fulfilled to be able to do this. The first one is obviously Python, so you can have any version of Python over 3.12. You need to have a Git client installed, so depending on if you're on Mac OS or Windows or Linux, you need a respective Git client installed. You will also need Node.js version 18 or above. This is for building the front-end files. You will need access to the Okta tenant with admin access, so you will be able to create the read-only API token needed for Tako AI to function. Finally, you will need access to any of the supported AI providers, so you can generate an API key and use it in the configuration. The first thing we do here is clone the repository and navigate to that folder. So let's copy those instructions and run them. Once that's done, let's create a Python virtual environment. and then we will activate the newly created virtual environment. The next thing we do is install the requirements. This is going to take a while depending on your internet connection and PC, so just copy paste this command and wait until it completes. Okay, the installation is done. If you are on Linux or Mac OS, you have those respective commands here, so you can follow them as well. The next thing we do is move the env.sample file, rename that to .env. And as mentioned in the first section, you need to configure your Okta settings and the LLM settings at a bare minimum. I have my environment file configured. Let's move on to the next step. The next thing we do is we need to build the front end files. So let's navigate to this directory. And then we are going to run the npm install command. The required node packages are installed, so let's go ahead and build the front-end files. Our front-end files have been built successfully, so let's go back to our parent directory. That should pretty much be it. Now we are in here. Let's go into the scripts folder and start our server. Let's run the command. It's going to take a while depending on your PC. This is the first run. The first run usually takes a bit longer, then it should be quicker. We are up and running. So if you see application startup complete and you see your port number, we are done with the setup. So let's navigate to that URL in the browser and launch the application. Since the certs are self-signed, so you will see this warning. It's fine. You can click on advanced and say continue to localhost. The first thing you'll have to do is set up your local username. These credentials will be saved in the local SQLite database, and this is what you'll be using consequently to log in. And here you are. The setup is done. So you can either go in here and start your sync if you want to sync the data to your SQLite folder, or you can just start querying your tenant with the sample queries provided here. With that, we'll close this video. Thank you so much for watching. And if you need any help or run into issues, please open a GitHub issue or send us an email at support@factory.io. Thank you.